Azure Pipelines YAML Explained, a practical guide for .NET teams. So, Azure Pipelines YAML. It's something a lot of people ask about, and today we're going to walk through it step by step. Next up, what is Azure Pipelines YAML and why does it matter for .NET teams? Azure Pipelines YAML is a code-as configuration format that defines your CI/CD workflow in a file checked into your repository alongside your application code. Unlike the classic UI-based editor, a YAML pipeline is version-controlled, reviewable, and reproducible across environments. For .NET teams specifically, this matters for three concrete reasons. A YAML file is part of the pull request, so reviewers can see exactly what changed in the build process. Pipelines can be templated and reused across microservices without copy-pasting through a GUI. And you can run the exact same pipeline logic in different stages by parameterizing environment variables. Microsoft introduced YAML pipelines in Azure DevOps in 2019, and they've become the standard for teams building on .NET 6 and above. If your team is still on classic pipelines, migrating to YAML is worth the investment, particularly before any Azure app modernization effort or a lift and shift to Azure migration. Next up, now, anatomy of an Azure Pipelines YAML file. Every Azure Pipelines YAML file follows a consistent structure. Here's the skeleton for a .NET project. Trigger defines what starts the pipeline. Runs the pipeline on every push to. You can also trigger on pull requests with and on tags with. Most teams set up both, a CI trigger on all branches and a CD trigger only on or release branches. Sets the build agent. Is required for most .NET Framework projects. For .NET 6/7/8 cross-platform code, is faster and costs less per minute on Microsoft-hosted agents. Moving on to how do I write a YAML pipeline for .NET. Here is a working example for a typical ASP.NET Core application deploying to Azure App Service. This follows the how to pattern teams search for most. Step 1, define the trigger in pool. Step 2, add a build stage with restore, build, and test. Now, Azure Pipelines YAML, key stages for .NET applications. A production-ready .NET pipeline typically runs through 4 distinct stages. Here's what each one should contain. Restore packages, compile in release mode, run unit tests, and publish test results. Keep this stage under 5 minutes. If it's slower, look at your restore step first. Using a cache task for NuGet packages cuts restore time by 60 to 80% on warm builds. Stage 2, static analysis and code quality. Run SonarQube, Roslyn analyzers, or the built-in security scanning tasks here. This stage catches issues before they reach the integration environment. When teams request an Azure security assessment, a missing static analysis stage is one of the most common gaps found in existing pipelines. Next up, moving on to how Azure Pipelines YAML connects to your migration strategy. Teams planning to migrate on-premise to Azure often treat the CI/CD pipeline as an afterthought. It shouldn't be. The pipeline is how every future change reaches production, and designing it poorly before the migration means rework mid-flight. For a hybrid cloud Azure setup where some services remain on-premises and others run in Azure, YAML pipelines support multi-environment deployments natively. You can deploy to on-premises infrastructure using a self-hosted agent pool while running builds in the cloud. This flexibility matters during the transition period when you can't move everything at once. If your team is working with an Azure migration partner, the YAML pipeline setup should be part of the project scope, not a handoff item after go-live. A structured pipeline is part of the Azure Infrastructure Assessment deliverable because it documents how code reaches production, which matters for compliance and change management. Next up, moving on to Azure cost optimization through smarter pipeline design. Pipeline configuration directly affects your Azure DevOps bill. Teams often overlook this during setup and get surprised when monthly compute costs run higher than expected. Microsoft-hosted agents are billed per minute with different rates per OS. According to Microsoft's Azure DevOps pricing documentation, Ubuntu agents cost less than Windows agents for the same workload. For .NET 8 and above targeting Linux deployments, switching to is one of the simplest wins in an Azure cost optimization consulting engagement. Running all test assemblies on a single agent is slow. You can split tests across parallel agents using the flag. The honest caveat: parallel jobs each consume a hosted pipeline minute. Splitting a 4-minute test run into 4 agents running 1 minute each uses the same total compute and adds scheduling overhead. Parallelization pays off only when you have 15 or more minutes of tests. Next up, let's talk about when to bring in Azure DevOps consulting services. Most teams get the basics right but hit walls in 3 specific areas. First, environment management. Setting up approval gates, per environment variable groups, and service connections with least privilege permissions takes Azure AD knowledge that most dev teams don't have day to day. Second, template architecture. Building reusable templates that scale across 10 to 20 services without becoming a maintenance burden requires deliberate upfront design. Next up, now, conclusion. Azure Pipelines YAML gives .NET teams a way to treat their CI/CD process with the same discipline they apply to application code. The structure is learnable in a day, the patterns in this guide cover most production scenarios, and the remaining complexity is specific to your environment, existing Azure infrastructure, compliance requirements, and service portfolio size. If you're starting a new migration or trying to clean up a pipeline setup that grew without structure, bringing in Azure consulting services for a targeted review often pays back faster than expected. Q Services works with teams across healthcare, logistics, and SaaS to build pipelines that hold up at scale, as part of broader Azure Cloud Migration Services engagements. Talk to a DevOps architect on our team to review your current pipeline setup or plan the CI/CD architecture for an upcoming migration. We offer a no-commitment Azure architecture review session to identify gaps and priority improvements.